It was a month since I got out of hospital. My scars reminded me daily of how close I came to death and how some things on this earth are impossible to believe. The news of the Rake was stifled quickly by some Russian agency. They carted the Rake's body away and instructed no one to talk about this. No one in a small town in Georgia is going to disobey a mysterious guise with guns. I returned home to find Slenderman around. Not just hints of him, I could see him outside my house every day, hiding amongst the trees. He seemed to be there the most when everything felt safer. I suppose this was the calm before the storm. At the time, I suspected there were more things out there like the Rake, but I never thought that any more supernatural things would happen to me for the rest of my life. I was very wrong. As the lazy summer days rolled into September, something strange happened. There were old bales of hay that sat outside my house. It stood to be farm grounds that when they split into 4 plots for housing. My house was in front of one of the fields and there were still bales of hay there because the house was built fairly recently. There were lines neatly behind the house and waited to be picked up. Well, one day I woke up to find the large bales of hay placed in a circle around the house, with about 6 feet between each one. It must be pranksters, my dad remarked. He seemed on edge. I assumed he thought that the Rake was back or something. Yeah, I said. Must be. When school started, I was, to some extent, a living legend. Everyone knew about the Rake. Even though I never saw him, I'm sure they also thought Slenderman was around because of the story I told them the night of the attack. Unfortunately, infamy does not equate to popularity. I was avoided by mostly everyone, except for Jess. She felt bad for running away that night. I told her she had no reason to feel bad, but she insisted that she had to make it up to me. Basically, life was going pretty well for me. Hell, after encountering the Rake twice, any life is good. A week after the bales of hay had been moved, they restacked behind the house. It happened again. Only this time, they were grouped closer to the house, only separated by 4 feet. Needless to say, everyone in my house was on edge. Was this another Slenderman, like I was warned about that night? I still had the paper with me. I kept it on my desk. The Operator, Der Ritter, the White King, Tree Man, Bundle, the Faceless Hitchhiker, the Guardian Angel. I was sure the last one was the Slenderman I knew. Perhaps one of the others had found me and targeted me for some malicious reason. That night, I needed to get some kind of idea of what was going on. Slenderman was bound to know something. He watches me 24/7. So, I sat by the window before bed and just thought about him. I had figured by this point that the Slenderman had some kind of telepathic abilities. Sure enough, he walked out past the tree line of the forest behind the fields and walked to my window. He was 16 feet tall, significantly taller than most of the stories. His bright red tie and white skin stood out of the darkness of the night. Who has been doing this? I asked him verbally. He pointed his head down for a moment, as if gathering himself. Something, he said into my mind, that is tall and lacks many human features. Another Slenderman? I gasped. No, not one of my kind, nor one of yours. He is tall even while he crawls. His hands are large enough to crush the moon in his palms, and his mouth wide enough to swallow the sun. Sounds like fun, I said flatly. Slenderman, for whatever reason, wanted to speak in riddles. So, am I being attacked by another monster, who apparently is very large and I don't know how he's hiding? These are his lands. He has lived here for ages, and anyone who tries to inhabit this has become his pet. I suggest leaving while he's still allowing you to. I can't just leave. This is my house. I just moved here. Slenderman gave no response. He turned and left. My only advice was to run. I would never be able to convince my parents to do it. And besides, what about Jess? I couldn't leave her. I figured that my guardian angel would keep me safe, so I went to bed that night. But I never fell asleep. In the morning, my father was sitting at the table. It was Saturday, so I had no reason to leave the house, but he did. He had a job. I was confused. He just sat there, staring blankly and sipping a cup of coffee. He was on edge again. I asked him what was wrong. Had the hay been moved again? Had he been fired? Was someone hurt? Jonah, stay inside. He never looked at me, he just staringly straight and told me to go. I'm meeting up with Jess in a bit. Why do I have to stay inside? Is there a storm coming? If only I knew the irony of that question. Look, you do not want to go out there. I brushed him off and opened the door. When I stepped out, I found something I did not expect. A giant handprint was in the front yard. I could see why my dad was spooked by this, but what caused him not to want to leave the house? The handprint looked big enough to have smashed a car if there was one. The sun suddenly seemed to have shut off. I turned and was greeted by something I can only describe as pure horror. It was large, taller than Slenderman. He was hunched over as if rearing back on his hind legs. Its body was covered in some kind of grey-brown fur. It had seemingly no eyes or nose or ears, but what it did have was a very large mouth, filled with jagged rock-like teeth. I was frozen in awe, staring at this monstrosity. It let out a loud growl and reached out to grab me. I bolted back into the house, slammed the door and leaned against it, panting. Hey Dad, I called through the house. Yes, he responded. I think I see why you didn't want to go out there. The day rolled by slowly and I was trapped inside. When I looked out the window I couldn't see the creature, but I saw evidence of him. Slenderman was right. The only option was to run, and not to pass some time in the night. I spent my time inside wisely, googling this thing. I searched tall, thing, monster, hay bales. Sure enough, I found what I was looking for. The thing that stalks the fields. I had read the story before, but only once, and it was quick. If the story was accurate, I could not cross the bales of hay and no one could enter it. The border gave me about 15 feet from the porch to the end of the hay bales. I then heard rustling in the trees. I turned to see this thing charging on all fours from the tree line. I rushed downstairs and opened the door, just in time to see her. She must have figured I forgot and came to visit. Jess. I ran to her. She was just between the two bales of hay. Hey, what's going on, city boy? What's with all the new lawn decorations? She laughed a bit, but it died when she heard the horrible booming of a charging giant. Get back, quick! I shouted as I pushed her back from the border. What the hell is going on, Jonah? She said as she fell back on her elbows, now a foot from the border. I felt the sun blow out behind me again. Jess screamed and there was a horrific roar. I turned in time to see the thing's giant hand come down to hit me. I closed my eyes. This was it. Something that scared even my protector away. Something stronger than the Rake had seemed to fit to kill me. Maybe I was just meant to die and only managed to escape it by luck. Maybe this was the plan all along and I just fucked it up. Maybe I should have just died instead of Herb. I remember thinking that the thing was taking its sweetest time to crush me. I opened one eye and looked up. He hadn't been scared away. Slenderman stood. His arms wrapped around me and his tentacles held the things he had at bay but just barely. It pulled its arm back and roared again. It didn't seem to like me having more visitors. Slenderman placed me on a bale of hay that had made the border and turned to face the thing. His tentacles whipped wildly behind him. The wind started to blow through the property, making the trees whisper. The thing's fur blew to side enough to expose his very small black eyes. With the thing on all fours, he was about a foot smaller than Slenderman. It stood up. Given that Slenderman is 16 feet tall, I'd put the thing on 2 legs as 22 feet tall. The thing made the first move and swung his large hand at Slenderman. Slenderman held his arm to the side, hatching the hit in his forearm. He slid to the side a little, but he otherwise held him to the ground. His fingers stretched, wrapping around the thing's fingers and holding it tightly. He lashed his tentacles forward, and the thing responded by grabbing all 6 tentacles in one hand after lifting Slenderman off the ground with his other hand. It pulled hard, tearing off the appendages it held. They seemed to disappear into the shadows the moment they disconnected from Slenderman. He took this distraction to stab his free arm into his hand, just like he had done to the rake. It hissed and dropped Slenderman, scrambling back a few feet. Slenderman was suddenly gone for a second. He was quickly back though, now right in front of the thing and slamming his fist into its jaw. The thing launched its uninjured hand at Slenderman and grabbed him around the waist. Its wounded hand grabbed his head and began to tug. I remember seeing something like this. The first time the rake attacked, Slenderman had done a similar thing to that monster. Slenderman impaled the thing's wrist with both arms and his tentacles. It was unfazed and continued to pull. This was the end for my protector. But it couldn't be. He saved my life twice now, I owed him that much. I jumped off the bale and picked up the biggest rock I found. I hurled it at the thing's face, hitting him in the eye. Blood squirted from his face and it released Slenderman, holding its eye now. Slenderman took his chance. He pulled his right arm from the beast's arm and shot it at his chest. The hit made blood pour out of the hole into his chest. He pulled his arm back and stabbed again, and again. In total there were 5 holes left in the furry bastard's torso. It fell back, hissing and writhing in pain. It scrambled onto all fours and started trying to run. Slenderman was gone again for a second and then back, blocking the thing's path. It opened its massive jaw and roared at him. Slenderman silenced him quickly by coldly tearing its jaw from its head. The thing was shocked and bellowed, a gurgling cry of agony. Slenderman stabbed the teeth from its mandible into the thing's head, and a loud crack followed. It was silent for a long time, while with the monster in a heap on the ground and Slenderman standing there. Jess was passed out on the ground. She fainted the moment she saw the thing running at her. I leaned over to her to check her breathing. She was still alive, which was good. Her eyes slowly fluttered open as she saw me. We stared at each other for a few seconds before she grabbed me and, well, without warning, pressed her lips to mine. I had just watched 2 supernatural monsters fight to the death, and yet this was by far the strangest part of my day. When she let go, she seemed a bit flustered. So, what was that about? I asked. I'm not complaining or anything. She giggled and brushed her hair from her face. Sorry, I just thought I'd never see you again. I smiled and looked back for Slenderman. He was gone, as I expected. He never seemed to like to stay and make sure I'm not permanently traumatized from watching something get horribly mangled before my eyes. I suppose he didn't like to hang around long enough to get caught by someone. It was 2 p.m. My neighbours had stayed inside for the entire event. They must have figured it was something to do with the Russian agency. I took Jess into my house and brought her up to my room to explain everything. I showed her the paper of different Slenderman names, showed her a story about the thing that stalks the field, and I even pointed out to her where Slenderman was in the woods behind my house. She seemed to take it well, or as well as one would take finding out that there was more than a few monsters that are real. The Russian people came back soon. They gave the same speech about keeping everyone out of the news. This time, they said they would place some guards for me in case another monster was to target me. I didn't feel it was necessary, but they did. They also asked how I managed to kill the thing. I simply said that I had an angel watching over me. My parents didn't like the idea of having 2 armed men from a strange foundation in the house, but they insisted they were safe. They said their mission was to secure, contain, protect. They seem to think another entity will try to harm me. Maybe I'm just bad luck, but Slenderman has proven that he can keep me safe.